What's up everyone? So for this week 3D rendering class, we are going to learn about UV. So what is UV? UV is one of the subcomponents of a 3D object in Maya. Well, it is kind of the same as edge, vertex and face, and UV is right over here. Except that you could not alter it directly on the mesh in 3D space. Instead, you alter it on the 2D dimensional surface known as the UV space. It is one crucial step before we put texture onto our 3D object, and UV is kind of a topic which is somewhat difficult to understand in one shot. Hence, be patient. If you still couldn't get it after watching this video, try and at least follow step by step, and eventually you will get the hang of it. Well, a simple explanation for UV is that UV is the surface area of a 3D object dissected and flattened out on a 2D surface, as you can see. Okay? Well, imagine that it is like a banana skin being peeled, dissected and flattened out and laid it flat on a table. Or how they actually make an actual tiger skin carpet. They peel the skin out of the tiger, dissect it where it is necessary, still maintaining most of the part of the skin connected, and flatten it out. Hence, the goal of the UV process is to lay out, quote unquote, the skin of a 3D object on a surface flat, having the most part connected to one another while having the least distortion it can possibly achieve. And guys, just to let you know, UV is a critical skill to master for accurate textures on polygonal surface. Well, in some advanced cases, it affects process where fur, hair, and dynamics are involved, as well as your rigging process when you are dealing with paint weight. You want to export paint weight or you want to import paint weight, that is all based on your UV. That means you can't simply just skip this step. You just have to learn how to do it. So after a bit of talking on the concept of UV, now we are going into the actual UV mapping and workflow. And for this part of the video, I'll be using a 3D file that I already prepared for the demonstration. So I'll be using these three 3D objects to demonstrate to you guys how to do UV, or what we call UVing. So the first one is a hat, and we have a pair of shoes, and then we have a table. I'll be doing the hat and the pair of shoes, and you guys will have to do this table, including with the hat and the shoe, in order to get your attendance for the week. Fair enough. So I'm using Autodesk Maya 2017 for the demo, and I think you should be able to do it on the other platform, the other 3D software as well, if you get the concept and the principles and the theories right. It shouldn't be a problem. So let us just open up our UV editor, which is you have to make sure you are under modeling module, so that you can have this UV on top of the toolbar, and then click on UV editor and you'll find something like this. And this is where we can manipulate our UV space. And if you click on a 3D object, so we are clicking on this head, the UV of the head is laid out on this positive side of the grid. Well, you have the whole grid, but we are going to use just the positive value of the grid, which is on the top right corner of the grid. As for the other three panels, which are in negative value, they are basically for your reference. So if you put the UV outside of the positive grid, you will find out that the texture is being repeated. So if you try and rotate in this UV editor, you can't do it. You can only just pan, and you can zoom in and zoom out, because this is a 2D space. It's not like the 3D space where you can rotate and things like that, but in 2D, in this UV space, it's only 2D. So this is the x-axis in the UV space, and then this is the y, which is substitution of the xy. This is u and this is v, and that is why we call it UV. This is u and this is v. Alright, before we go any further, it is very important for us to make sure the model is 100% completed, meaning there will be no changes afterward, as the UV is directly related to the vertex location of the 3D object, which means any further changes occurs on a single vertex of the 3D object, you will have to alter the UV map accordingly as well. I will advise you to delete history and do whatever is necessary to finalize the 3D modeling process of your model. So the very first step of doing UV is to project the UV onto the 3D object itself. So if you go to UV on top of this toolbar, you'll find a list of tools available for the UV process, and from automatic to contour, this portion of the menu is all the projection methods available for you to use. So the first one that I'll be going into is cylindrical. So cylindrical basically projects the UV in a cylinder shape, and what you can see over here, it is right after it is being projected. This is the UV being projected in a cylinder shape, and if I use a spherical projection method, it will be projected in the sphere. Look at the blue thin line over here, it's a sphere. So if you use contour stretch, so contour stretch is kind of new in Maya. It's basically it analyzes a four-cornered selection to determine how best to stretch the polygon's UV coordinates over the image. It is particularly useful for like a terrain, like a road and things like that. Things that is not regular, is irregular, so you use the contour stretch. And planar. So planar is the most used among all, I would say. I'll be explaining to you why it is the most used, at least for me. If you look at the planar mapping options, you will find two different types, which is the best plane, and you have a bounding box. And what best plane basically does is to find the most surface it can see from one direction and map it using that direction. So if I click on it, you'll find that Maya thinks that this direction sees the most of the surface. If I display the checkered tiles, I can see that it is the most, we can see the most from this angle. So however, this part is not done, so this is where we're gonna fix it later on. And bounding box as well. Bounding box, you can define the direction. You can set it to x-axis, you can set it to y-axis, you can set it to z-axis, you can set it to camera. So x-axis, basically it projects along x-axis, which is the side, y is from the top, and z is from the front. And camera is basically the direction which the camera that you are currently using. And if I click on it, yeah, see that? Whichever direction that I'm pointing, I'm looking at. Look. And don't forget to check this on, this option, keep image width height ratio on, because if you don't keep this on, Maya will fill the UV in the UV space. it will fill up the whole UV space, no matter it is distorted or not. But in this case, it is distorted. So you want to check this on so that you can know, you can make sure it is not distorted, unless you want to make it distorted or and things like that. So you can turn this off. All right. So the last projection method that I want to talk about is the automatic. So if you click on automatic, it will basically divide and dissect the 3D object, the UV, into separate pieces, a few pieces, according to the distortion level of the UV, the surface. So let's see what happens. I mean, it may sound good, it may sound awesome, but usually most of the time it doesn't does what it promised. So I will recommend the beginners don't use automatic. So you learn the basic first, and then you can improvise later on. All right. So let's see what happens after we click on this. So as you can see, the UV is separated into and dissected into a few pieces. We have these weird small pieces. I think the reason why, because it has the most distortion over here. Hence, as you can see, it doesn't do a really good work. You have things like that. You have a UV that is, you don't know where it is, where it belongs. You will waste a lot of time figuring out where it is on the 3D object. So you can find this useful later on, but not now. So I will not advise you to use it for now. Alright? So this is all about the projection method. And yeah, before I forget, this camera base is the same as the camera function in the planner. So base plane, this one I don't think you need to know for now. And what else? Okay. Among all these projection methods, cylindrical gives you a seam. So you might be wondering, what is a seam, or what we call a seam line? So a seam is an edge or a vertex which is interconnected in the 3D space, meaning it's connected, it's merged, but it's separated in the UV space. Let's change, project it using planner and look at it better. So this edge, both of these edges is connected and merged in the 3D space, meaning it's one edge. But if you cut it in the UV space, it can be cut, so you will find it separated while it is still one edge in the 3D space. So that is a seam. So when you paint something on it, you will find it separated in terms of the texture. So that is a seam line. Get it? So back to the topic. So when you do cylindrical, it gives you a seam. You can toggle it, you can set it by toggling, what do you call that, the UV border on. So this is the seam. The thicker one is the seam, and if you use a spherical, it produces a seam as well. Maya will find a seam for you. I mean, it'll cut a seam for you. Only planner doesn't give you any seam at all, and that is the reason why I'm using planner most of the time. Okay, because I want to cut it my own. I don't want Maya to decide to cut it for me. Okay. And another thing before I forget, this you can only project the UV onto a 3D object by selecting the object, and you project. You can also select face. So let me just, okay, I can also project by selecting face, and now I have two separated UV shell. A UV shell is connected, is a series of UV connected to one another. and that is called UV shell. So in this case we have two UV shell. So if I click on one of the UVs and then I hold control and then I right click and I go to shell, and this is the UV shell of that UV just now I click belongs to. Okay, so now we have two UV shell. So you can combine different projection methods onto different parts of the 3D object. So meaning if you want to have this, you want to project this part separately. Team planner again, you can do so, and things like that. Alright, you can also select the face over here and then you do a cylindrical. It's up to you. See, this is pretty good actually. If you toggle this on, then you will see, you'll find it not bad, but not, it's still far from what we want to achieve. You can see distortion on this part. The checker is kind of short. Okay, you can select the face over here instead of that. So if you find this is easier to select, because sometimes you lay out the UV already like that and you don't want to go inside and select one by one, but instead you can just select the whole UV, or you can select the whole UV shell and you control and hold control and right click, and you can go to the face like that, go to the edge. Okay, this is a shortcut for you. So the next step of UVing is to cut UV edges where it is necessary to produce UV shells, because it couldn't be just one UV shells and it has like no distortion. It must have distortion if you have only one UV shell, because it's, unless it is like a 2D plane. If it is a 3D which has a volume in it, there will be a few UV shells. It will have a few same line. Okay, so to cut UV edges, you have to first identify where to cut. This might sound stupid, but just imagine the 3D object in your mind and try and dissect it in your mind, and imagine what will happen if you cut over here. Can it be flattened out? Will it look good? Is that the right place where the seam should be? Things like that. Because if you cut it right, the unfolding process will be so much easier, and if you cut it wrong, you will have to stitch everything back, and then you have to seal it back. There's a lot of sewing work to do later on, so you want to get it right. So just to demo to you guys, I have to project it back to planner, because this is actually, we have three separated UV shells already, which is actually all these are cut, and that is one way. So you can actually select faces and project it to cut, but this is not what I want to tell you. But like this, first you select UV edges that you want to cut. So in this case, I will identify it as something like a cylinder. So it will need like two horizontal lines over here, one edge loop over here. You want to cut it open, and then you want to cut this part open as well, and then you want to have one line across everything so that it can be, this whole volume can be flattened out. I mean, this side can be flattened out. So I select the edge that I want to cut. So I go to this UV editor. The edge is already selected. So I shift, right click, and cut UVs. And then I want to cut it here as well, so I select here and then I cut. And then I need a line from the top to the bottom. So I think this can be 1, so I cut it as well. So this is one way of cutting. You can right click and then you hold shift and right click, cut UVs, and then you can also, by selecting by using these two on top, cut UV too, and then you drag along the edge and then you'll be cut. You can also, if you want to seal it back, if you have accidentally cut it wrong, you want to seal it back, you can either click on the edge that you want to seal it back, you hold shift and move and seal UVs, or you want to seal UVs. Okay, the difference is that sometimes if you have you have something like this, and then you want to seal it back, you can not this part. If you seal it back, it will look something. You look something like this. But if you move, and then the whole thing will move accordingly. So it depends on how you want to use it. But I don't want to seal it back actually, so I just undo. And another way of sealing back UV edge is by using these two, seal UV too. So you have basically a black circle where you can manipulate, and just have to drag along the cut UV. You see, it's influence. This part is influence, which I don't want. I just want this part to. Yep, done. So that is there are a few ways for you to actually cut it and seal stuff. So after we cut it, so now we have our edge, our seam. This is our seam that we have already cut. So after we have cut necessary UV edges to create seams or seam lines so that it can be flattened out, we have to perform unfold to flatten out the UVs. So you hold shift and right click and then unfold. There you go. So turn on the checkered tiles and see how it goes. So I can see pretty good. It's kind of everything is in order, but slight distortion on this part. Let's turn on this UV distortion. It's like a heat map for you to check the distortion. So the first way is by looking at by eyeballing, just to look at whether the square is distorted or not, to see if the distortion level. The second thing you can do is to open up to turn on the UV distortion guide, which is something like that. So the red color indicates stretching, so you can see a little bit of stretching along the side over here, which is why it is in red. And then if it's in blue, which we don't see it in our case, blue is compression. So we want to have minimum amount of red and blue. We want everything to be in white, but a little bit amount of red sometimes is just unavoidable. So it's fine to have a minimum amount of red and blue. So that is like two ways that we can actually check the distortion level. So yeah, if you close this checkered tiles, you can see the heat map, the UV distortion level directly on this 3D object. There's another way to check the distortion level, which is what I have been doing for the past few years. I will put in I'll hook up a UV checkered texture map on to the shader of the 3D object of my 3D object. So what shader of this 3D object is currently Lambert 1. So under color, I'm going to hook up with a file, a UV checker map that I found on the internet, where I find it very useful because it provides all the information that I need from 0 to 1 coordinates. And there you go. So it is always on as long as you have the texture mode on, so you can always check whether it is nicely done or not. So you can see there's distortion over here because the square is really distorted. So I would say that this is slightly too big, the square is too big. So you go under color, and then you go into the arrow box icon, and then you go to the place 2D texture. So you go under repeat UV, you change it to 5, both 5, then it will be repeated like 5 times. So yep, but that one you want to turn it off later on if you want to use Lambert for your texturing purpose. So that one is basically repeating the 0 to 1 coordinates for 5 times. Alright, so basically we want to perform unfold again until it has the best possible result. So let's turn on this. Okay, one thing I want to tell you guys is that unfold, if you are using 2015 and above, you will have unfold 3D and legacy. So these two are basically different engine to unwrap your UV. So unfold 3D is introduced in 2015. It's an external plugin actually. So if you can't find unfold 3D, you can go to Windows and under settings and under plugin manager, scroll down, and then you'll find unfold 3D over here. So make sure both is this is checked, and then if you want to make sure this every time it's activated, you want to check this as well. So unfold 3D is an external plugin, but unfold 3D is a way more intuitive way to actually unwrap your UV. So what it does is actually it calculates based on this 3D object, and then it performs the unwrap. So if legacy is kind of stupid, I would say it's kind of an old school thing, where last time Maya is just legacy. So it basically calculates how you arrange the UV. You have to arrange nicely before it can calculate nicely. It calculates per surface actually. So if you guys want to take a look at how it performs, so I have to just use legacy for a while. Oh, I haven't cut anything yet. So let me just cut it real fast. So I'm using legacy now. Look at that. You have to press like super lot of times, and then only it will start to unfold. So basically you have to actually do half of the work for it in order for it to work. It's kind of like it's not working. So you have to actually go in one by one and tweak it. You have to tweak, make it like almost similar the shape, and then it will start to unfold nicely. Or you can actually use this what you call that, this smooth UV tool, where you can unfold. Yeah, this works better. So you can unfold like this, you can relax, you can unfold. relax basically distribute all the UV space between UVs evenly, so it's kind of, you relax a bit, then you unfold it back to get results. Well, that is a very hectic way to do, so you don't want to do that. You want to instead use this unfold 3D and then pop. It's kind of done. It's done. Right? I think this part of the head is not supposed to be like that. Yep. So what you want to do is you to combine this edge right here. So you move this edge and then you select everything again and then you unfold. Right. I think that's like the best possible UV that we can go, and everything else, well, this is looks nice. Everything is white and this is what we want. Okay, and I think this can be sealed together as well, right? No harm. So this is, I think this is like the best we can go. So we are done on the head. So before we move on to the other objects, we want to make sure that the scaling between each of the shells is the scaling of the size is almost the same. As you can see now, this square is really big and this is slightly smaller. We want to have the same, like the same size, so that later when we texture, we know how big it is. The size is uniform. Alright. I think this is something, I think is close enough. On top as well. Go to UV shell and slightly too big, smaller. I think close enough. So why are we going to maintain the scale? This is very important, you know, because later on when we want to do texture, we don't want to find out the scale when we do texture. That's why we are doing it in this UV process, so that it saves the hassle of figure out the scale of each UV shell later on. Okay, so this is the last step before we want to move on to the next object. Oh yeah guys, I have this one thing that I almost forgot to mention to you guys. So sometimes you might find your UV shell appears to be like this. It might seem to be the same as just now, but when you toggle on the UV shaded display, you'll find that the UV shell is in red, and that means it is flipped. So you usually don't want that to happen, as it will affect your texturing process later on. You have to flip the texture map as well for this part, so you don't want that to happen. So you want to flip it back, you go to polygons and you flip. Under polygons, flip. There you go. You also don't want it to be overlapped with one another, with the other UVs, unless you intended to do so. And that means this part of the texture will be used together by these two UVs, this part of the UVs repeatedly. Unless you have a plan to do so, to flip the UV. If not, usually we don't do it. Alright, so let's get going with our next object, which is the right pair of the shoe. So the very first step is to project the UV onto the 3D object. So I don't really care about the projection method, because usually most of the time I will use a planner as it stitch all the UV together. The more important thing for me is always know where to cut, where to create the seams. So this is the very first seam that I have identified. I want to separate the top part, and then if you can see, we have the inner surface and the outer surface of the shoe. They are both facing opposite direction, so when it's facing opposite direction, you have to separate them because it couldn't be flattened out together. So I have selected this edge loop over here so that it can be separated. So we also want to cut one line vertically over here, because if you look at this is somehow like a cylinder, and you need one line anywhere actually to open the whole thing up. So I will choose this part, as this part is probably the least noticeable by the audience. And if you look at the actual product, I think this is where they stitch the ladder together, or the surface together. So it kind of makes sense. So you don't want to cut it over here, as it will be a lot noticeable for the audience. So you have to choose where to cut wisely. So I already chosen 3 edges, so I want to cut, and I select all the UVs and then I unfold. So it kind of look okay, except that I don't really like this part. It's like sticking out, so I want to cut it off. And probably I'm gonna stitch it back with this main part of the top part of the shoe. So I cut, and then this part, selecting the part where it is connected with this. So I move and seal the UVs. Alright, and then I go to the show and unfold again. Alright, so we have something like this, we have something like this. So let's check the distortion level of the UV that we have unwrapped. So this part is definitely having issues, this part as well. So I think overall is pretty okay, just that 2 part. So that 2 part, we want to fix it. Toggle up UV distortion, and you find that this part is having the most distortion. You see this dark red over here. So what we can do is we use this UV unfold UV tool to unfold further on this part. Yeah, there you go. So in order to use this, you have to select the UVs that you want to have influence on. So in this case, I select the whole UV shell. So I also figure out that this part is a little bit too much of compression, so I select the whole UV shell, and then I do this unfold UV tool as well on this part, and see if we can actually unfold it further using this smooth UV tool. To smooth UV tool. Yeah, I think this is kind of optimized. So I think this part is inside of the shoe. I don't think people can see much, and I think the distortion level is not that bad. Yep. So I think I'll leave it. I will consider it done for now. You guys can definitely do it better if you later on you guys try it out. So before we laid it out, we make sure the scaling of the UV shell is almost the same with one another. We do this, so the base of the shoe isolated, and then plan a project, and then look at this as a cylinder. So it's pretty easy. You just have to cut on the top part and the bottom part, and then find a seam at the, I think at the back, where most people will not notice. So cut and just pump, unfold. So I don't think there will be distortion. Yep, all white, all good. So we want to make sure that the scaling is almost the same at least. Yep, that would do. So we have the base of the shoe done. Now we want to match the scale of the top part of the shoe, the main part of the shoe, with the base of the shoe. So let's start with this. It's pretty close already. So I think this is okay. Then this part of the shoe. Yep, I think it's close enough. Then this the last part, the inner part of the shoe. I think this is close enough. So yep, for now I will not be laying out everything nicely because we still have one more, the lap shoe to go. Alright, so now we have come to the last object. I mean, not the last object, but for me, for this demonstration, this is the last one. So I'm not going to do the whole process again like this one. I just gonna copy the UV from this one to this one. You can do that, yes. So what we're gonna do is we select the object that we want to copy from, and then we hold shift, and then select the next object which is we want to copy to. So go under mesh and then transfer attributes, and then go click on this little box on the right, and then make sure vertex position and vertex normal is off, UV sets, UV color sets is all, and then the sample space. So in this case we can't use component, because usually we use component. All right, component is for you to transfer the UV or whatsoever that according to the vertex position and location of the object. So in this case, these two shoes are 100% identical. Then you can use components. So let me show you guys. If I use a contour stretch, and then yep, and then you leave mirroring off unless you want to mirror it, and then you want to flip, you don't want to flip UV, so off. So select the first one and then the second one that you want to copy to, and then apply. Yep, there you go. So because the vertex position is the same, however it will not work if you use component for this. So if I use component, it will look like this, because I use duplicate special to create this shoe, the left part of the shoe. So it's basically the vertex position is -1 in scale, so it couldn't work. So we have to use topology instead by Maya will look at the topology instead of the vertex location, so this should work. So yeah, there you go. So then we do on the base as well, the base of the shoe. So yep, you got it. And when you copy the UVs, it will lay on top of each other in the UV space. So if I, can you see that? So you can either leave it together on top of each other if you just want to like texture it similarly, but if you want to texture it separately, you have to separate it into onto a different area. All right, so there you go, a simple and fast way to just copy UV from one to another. So the last thing, when we finally unwrap like everything except for the table, we want to lay it out in the UV space properly. So we can only use this part, the positive part of the UV space. So we want to fit everything together in this one UV space. That means I'm going to use one texture map, and then I can use it for both of these objects. The texture map can apply to both of this because they share the same UV space. So what you can do is to do it manually. That's the first. Oh, before that, we have to make sure as well that the UV size, the scaling of the size, is consistent between two objects as well. So we, in this case, we want to separate out this the UV of the head. We want to make sure that the size of the UV is almost the same. I think it's pretty close actually, so that's good. That means that we can proceed to lay it out. So definitely, if you look at this whole thing, you can't definitely couldn't fit in, so you scale everything together, not just one. That will mess up your scaling later on. So for my case, I want to put like both of this texture on top of each other. So basically just fit in everything in this UV space. The practice over here is to try and save the most UV space, meaning you utilize all the very single bit of UV space to the max, so that you can have the UV laid out to the maximum. Okay. So for our case, because we still have a table, which I'm not going to do, you guys will be doing the table. So one thing is, you want to separate the UV shell according to the material. So the base of the shoe is kind of the same material, so you want to put those together. On one side, so that when you paint, you can just paint by region. And this part of the shoe, you can fit it over here. The reason why I'm keep selecting like an area, because there's something at the, I mean, the UV is overlapping each other. Remember, we have like two UV shell overlapping each other, so I don't want to just select one shell, I want to select both of them. So that's why I'm doing this. Okay, so this is pretty much it. So if this is considerably done, you can export this UV map out so that you can paint the texture on it as to use this as a guide. So you go under polygons and then you UV snapshot, and then you can find the file directory that you want to have your picture exported out. So the size, I'll put it 1025, which is the 1K texture. It depends on the size of the object, the 3D object that you are dealing with. So if you are having a really huge object, so you can increase this to 2K or 4K or whatsoever, it's up to you. So the image value, the image format you want to, usually I use PNG and JPEG because these are the two common one. And you can also change the color value, which is the line, the color of the line. So and then you press OK. Okay, then you can go into the location that you export the image, and then here you go. Okay, so you can use this as the guide to paint your texture later on. So I hope that you can catch up so far, and you can proceed to do the table. It shouldn't be too hard. It is made out of simple cube. So try and apply all the principle that the theory that you learned just now and the tools that you learned just now, and to unwrap the table. So I hope you enjoyed the lesson. Then do email me if you have troubles or you have a question, and I will try my best to answer your question. So that's it for today, and thank you guys, and I'll see you in class next week.